I didn't flinch when the clippers buzzed to life. The sound was cold, electric, and too close. But I didn't scream. I had already done that an hour earlier when my sister slammed the stall door shut behind me, shoved my shoulder against the cracked tile wall, and whispered, "Don't fight this. You brought it on yourself." Then the first lock of hair fell. My name was still being called on the overhead speaker outside the courthouse restroom. "Miss Kaylin Whitaker? Please proceed to courtroom C." But I couldn't answer. I was trapped inside the women's bathroom of the Chatham County Courthouse, held hostage by someone who shared my blood and none of my soul. Vivian didn't break a sweat. Her heels stayed steady on the tile floor as if this was just another part of her routine, like brushing her teeth or forging a grant application in someone else's name. By the time she dropped the clippers into her handbag and stepped back, her eyes were calm. "There!" she said, smoothing her ivory blazer. "Now you look how you feel." Like nothing. 20 minutes later, I stood in front of the security checkpoint, my ID trembling slightly in my hand, my scalp half covered with a silk headwrap I borrowed from the emergency restroom kit. No one asked what happened. No one even looked at me long enough to wonder. That's how shame works. It cloaks itself in invisibility. I checked the time on my phone. 8:27 a.m. My badge still clung to the blazer pocket, freshly printed and pinned by a clerk who hadn't even bothered to double-check the name. It didn't read Kaylin Whitaker. It didn't even say visitor. It read in bold, impersonal letters, K. Nobody. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like it always did when something cruel became familiar. I had seen this kind of message before, not on paper, but in glances, in silences, in invitations I never received. Across the marble atrium, I spotted them, my mother in her navy suit, arms crossed as if holding back a storm, and Vivian, perfectly composed, seated like a royal who had never knelt before truth. She smiled when she saw me, not a warm smile, the kind of smile a snake would wear if it had lips. She raised her phone. Click. A soft shutter sound echoed across the room as she captured the image of me, my mismatched headwrap, my uninvited presence, my badge that screamed, "You don't belong here." I adjusted the badge anyway, smoothed it like it meant something. My hand lingered on it longer than necessary, fingers curled tight around the edge. I didn't need to see her expression to know what it said. I'd seen it since we were girls. I win. But this wasn't a game. It was a setup. "Ms. Whitaker." The woman at the registration desk barely looked up. "You're late." "I was delayed," I replied, calm and clipped. "Family matters." She handed me a courtroom pass and motioned to the hallway on the left. I could feel the pulse behind my eyes starting to drum. Every footstep sounded louder than the last as I walked down the polished corridor toward courtroom C. At 8:45 a.m., I pushed open the door. The room was already half full. Lawyers murmured at counsel tables, and a few donors from the Whitaker Foundation sat behind them, people who had shaken my hand once and promptly forgot me. I took a seat in the back row, far from the center aisle, far from the family row where my mother and Vivian sat with perfect posture and zero acknowledgement of my existence. The courtroom smelled of old paper and cold ambition. For a moment, I told myself I was just there to observe, to make sure nothing unjust happened behind closed doors. But as the lights dimmed slightly and a projection screen slid down from the ceiling, I knew better. This wasn't a hearing about administrative budget misalignments. This was about me. At exactly 9 a.m., Vivian's attorney stood. "Your Honor," he began with a slick grin, "we'd like to open with a brief visual to provide context." Click. The projector whirred to life. A giant photograph appeared on the screen. Me, just an hour ago, mid-step, dazed and unkempt, with the badge clearly visible. K. Nobody. Gasps fluttered through the gallery. A few people shifted uncomfortably. My mother didn't move. She didn't need to. That was part of the theater. Absence as judgment. The attorney gestured like a magician revealing a trick. This image was taken this morning. Unannounced entry. Disregard for procedure. And perhaps, he paused, eyes twinkling, indication of personal instability. Instability. That word didn't sting anymore. It didn't land like a dagger. It was too rehearsed, too convenient, like a script I'd been cast in before I learned to speak. But I didn't speak. Not yet. I stared at the screen, at the blurred version of myself, captured without consent, weaponized without mercy. I knew what this was. Vivian had built a courtroom out of whispers, and now she wanted to use it to crush the only witness left who remembered the blueprints. I didn't blink. That was the only power I had left in that moment. I kept my face steady, my hands clasped in my lap, even as the image on the screen loomed larger than life, larger than memory. A courtroom clerk adjusted the lighting. Shadows stretched across the wood-paneled walls. The judge, an older woman with silver-rimmed glasses and the weariness of years spent parsing lies from law, said nothing. Not yet, but the air shifted. I felt it ripple across the room. The slow realization from those watching that this wasn't just a meeting about budget discrepancies. This was personal. This was orchestrated. And I was the sacrifice. Vivian didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Her smirk was already etched in the posture of her body. Legs crossed at the ankle. Chin tilted just so, like a woman watching her plan unfold flawlessly. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to feel the wood of the pew press into my spine. I remembered this sensation. 16 years ago. It was our 25th birthday. Our father had always insisted we share the celebration. Twin spirits, he used to say, even though we were 2 years apart. That year, Vivian had taken over the planning. The theme, the venue, the guest list. I'd helped, of course, cutting ribbons, confirming RSVPs, picking up the cake. I'd spent the whole day preparing for a night I believed we were sharing. But when I arrived at the venue, my name was missing from the welcome sign. "Happy birthday, Vivian," it read in gold foil letters. No mention of me, not even a single candle reserved. The guests had no idea. They hugged her, toasted to her brilliance, posted photos tagged only with her name. I spent most of the evening on the balcony, staring down at the parking lot lights, holding a slice of cake I couldn't eat. She never apologized. When I asked why she left me out, she just laughed. "I figured it'd be less confusing for everyone," she said. "Besides, you don't really like attention anyway, do you?" She was right. I didn't like attention. I liked acknowledgement. The slide changed. Another photo appeared. This time, a screen-captured file listing my name beneath a psychological report header. "Your Honor," Vivian's lawyer continued, "we also feel it's important to submit this record, retrieved legally under public concern guidelines, from the Savannah Mental Health Institute, dated November 2006. I stopped breathing for a moment. That year, that place, I hadn't spoken of it in almost 2 decades. The page on the screen displayed familiar words: emotional dysregulation, borderline instability, recommended observation. But it wasn't a diagnosis. It was an erasure. Thanksgiving weekend, 2006. I had just returned early from grad school to surprise my family. I used my key to open the apartment door. It didn't work. Vivian had changed the locks. She'd forgotten I was coming home, or so she claimed. I called her 3 times. No answer. It started snowing. After 30 minutes of pounding on the door in thin sneakers and no coat, I collapsed on the front steps, shivering so hard my teeth clicked against each other. A neighbor eventually called 911. At the hospital, I was silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned silence was safer. My mother arrived late that night. She didn't ask what happened. She just signed a form, patted my knee, and told me it was better this way. She called it rest. I called it punishment. I stayed in that place for 72 hours. Not one doctor ever spoke to me beyond intake. There was no therapy, no explanation. Just cold food, locked doors, and shame. And when I came home, no one mentioned it again, like it had never happened. Until now. The judge looked up. Is Ms. Whitaker listed as a formal witness in today's proceedings? Vivian's attorney gave a rehearsed frown. No, Your Honor. She appeared of her own volition, walked in without scheduling, without clearance, and, as the badge shows, without status. Without status. My nails dug into the bench. They hadn't just planned this. They had weaponized it. I wasn't merely unwelcome. I was unmade. On paper. On screen. In front of the very people who once called me the heart of the foundation. I turned my eyes slowly toward Vivian. She didn't flinch. She adjusted her sleeve, whispered something to our mother, and continued watching the screen like it was a slideshow of vacation photos. The attorney clicked to the next slide. Metadata logs. Timestamps. File access history. This photo, he said, tapping the first image, the one of me in the hallway, was taken at 7:16 a.m. I blinked. That couldn't be. I had parked at 7:52. I remembered because I took a photo of the court map on my phone, time-stamped and geotagged. They had altered the timestamp. They'd faked the sequence to imply I'd been lurking, unstable, desperate to inject myself into a legal proceeding that, on paper, didn't concern me. I opened my phone, quietly, fingers trembling. I scrolled to the photo. There it was. 7:52 a.m. Geotag, Chatham County Courthouse. Proof. But I didn't raise my hand. Not yet. I waited, because some lies unravel best when they tighten first. The judge leaned forward, her fingers steepled. I find the inclusion of sealed psychological records troubling, she said finally. How were these accessed? Through a clerical request tied to the Foundation's board restructuring, the attorney replied smoothly. Do you have documentation of that request? There was a pause, a slight one, but enough. I knew that pause. It was the sound of a thread loosening. And somewhere, deep in the back row of the courtroom, someone stood. Not a lawyer, not a staff member. The man in the charcoal gray coat. He stepped forward, quiet and deliberate, carrying a sealed manila envelope. He handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, he said, voice low but firm. My name is Marshall Reddick. I'm a federal investigator with the Department of Justice. That envelope contains documentation regarding the unauthorized access of sealed federal health records by a party directly connected to this case. The room stilled. Vivian's smile faltered. Just a fraction. But it was enough. The envelope looked ordinary, vanilla manila, sealed with a single strip of clear tape. But the way the bailiff carried it, like it might explode in his hands, told everyone in the courtroom exactly what it was. A bomb in legal paper. Judge Miriam Claiborne adjusted her glasses as she broke the seal. Her brow furrowed within seconds, then deepened into something heavier, more personal. She didn't look at me. Not yet. But I knew whatever she saw inside that file, it had shifted the direction of this morning forever. She set the documents down and turned her gaze toward the courtroom reporter. Please note for the record, Exhibit 14B is now under federal investigation for suspected unlawful acquisition via internal access manipulation. Proceed with caution until DOJ review is complete. A quiet hum of shock rippled through the audience. Chairs creaked. Pens froze midair. Even Vivian, polished, poised, perfectly curated, tilted her head just slightly. Then she smiled again. Not the smirk of someone who'd won. No, the smile of someone who still believed she could. Her lawyer stood again, brushing down his sleeves as if straightening facts. With respect, Your Honor, none of this disqualifies the content of the psychological report. The fact remains, Ms. Whitaker has a history of instability. It is relevant to the credibility of her behavior today. Objection! A voice rang out beside me. I turned. I hadn't realized the seat, next to me, was no longer empty. Langston. He hadn't entered with the others, hadn't made a sound. But now he was standing, dressed in a dark suit, not yet robed, not yet seated on the bench, but already radiating the weight of someone who would be. He nodded toward the bench. Your Honor, I have a judicial motion in hand regarding the assignment of this case. With your permission, I'd like to approach and formally submit. The judge raised an eyebrow, then gestured him forward. The courtroom held its breath as he walked, measured, precise, deliberate, as if every step was part of a long overdue reckoning. He handed over a slim folder and stepped back. Judge Claiborne scanned it, then slowly looked up. Well, this is unprecedented. A pause. As of 9:43 a.m. this morning, the presiding judge of this session has submitted full recusal documentation for familial connection. The replacement assignment was reviewed and filed via emergency substitution protocol. Judge Elias Grant. And then the moment shattered. Vivian stood, slowly at first, then with mounting disbelief. No, she said aloud, then louder. No, this is a conflict of interest. He's her fiancé. This is absurd. Her voice cracked just faintly, not from panic, from fury. Langston didn't blink. He simply stepped forward again, now in full judicial authority, and spoke to the entire room with calm that cut deeper than shouting ever could. I filed recusal from all personal affiliations with Ms. Whitaker 3 weeks prior to this session. That filing was processed and verified by the Judicial Ethics Office. I stand here today in capacity only as an independent judicial replacement. Nothing more. His tone didn't waver. His eyes didn't find mine. He was no longer my Langston. He was Judge Grant now. The screen behind him lit up again. Only this time it wasn't a photo of me. It was a ledger, a financial report, column after column of figures, vendor names, transfer codes, dates. Langston continued, voice clear, steady, and merciless. According to independent audit submitted under subpoena request, the Whitaker Foundation transferred over $480,000 during inactive fiscal periods to third-party vendors. Copper Elm Strategies, Bright Core Initiatives, Halden, and Rowe. All 3 entities trace back to one individual, Vivian Whitaker. Vivian sat down, hard. Her attorney looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 minutes. Langston wasn't finished. These transfers occurred while Ms. Kaylin Whitaker's portion of the trust was frozen due to administrative instability concerns. These concerns, it now appears, were manufactured via falsified documentation and sealed psychological records unlawfully obtained through unauthorized system logins. He looked up, right at Vivian. Therefore, per Article 38.4b of the Georgia Civil Ethics Code, this matter qualifies for immediate referral to federal prosecution under fiduciary fraud and identity defamation statutes. The room didn't erupt. It imploded, silently, like all the lies had suddenly run out of oxygen. I didn't cry. I didn't move. For once, I didn't have to explain. Langston closed the file gently and gave a single nod to the clerk. Then he stepped down from the bench, walked past me without a glance, and left through the side door. Clean. Final. Vivian remained seated. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face looked smaller now, like a statue chipped at the edges. My mother leaned toward her, whispered something, but Vivian didn't react. She was calculating, still clinging to the illusion of control. But the numbers didn't lie. Not like she did. I stood up, not to follow Langston, not to make a statement, but to breathe, to reclaim the feeling of weight returning to my own name. I crossed the courtroom floor slowly, deliberately, past the projection screen, past the pew where the Foundation's board members sat in stunned silence. At the door, I paused. I turned just enough to look back, not at Vivian, but at the seal of the court carved into the wood above the judge's bench. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone who needed to be rescued. I felt like someone who had survived and still stood. The doors to the courtroom hadn't even finished closing when Vivian's attorney was already on his feet again, waving a file like a lifeline tossed to a drowning client. Your Honor, he barked toward Judge Claiborne. "We respectfully move for an emergency injunction. The entirety of this proceeding is compromised. The presiding judge, Judge Grant, is the former romantic partner of Ms. Kaylin Whitaker. This court is tainted by bias." He turned to the gallery like a politician playing to invisible cameras. "We are requesting the session be voided in its entirety." Vivian didn't speak this time. She didn't need to. Her face said it all. Smugness clawing its way back, like mold returning through cracked plaster. I didn't move. Not right away. Because I didn't need to anymore. Power wasn't shouting. It was standing still and letting truth walk in on its own feet. Judge Claiborne looked exhausted. She tapped the gavel once, not in anger, but like she was waking the system itself. "This court acknowledges the conflict of interest," she said evenly. "Under procedural urgency, emergency substitution will be appointed." A clerk rose from the front bench. "Per state override protocol, the matter will now fall under the supervision of Judge Margaret Evelyn Rhodes, retired Circuit Justice of the Southern Judicial Panel." There was a collective inhale. Judge Rhodes was a name people knew, not just for her rulings, but for her silence, measured, brutal, and impossible to argue with. 2 minutes later, she entered. No flourish, no smile, just a black robe, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that made you sit straighter without knowing why. She sat. She scanned the docket. Then she looked up. "Let's proceed," she said, and everything changed. Vivian whispered to her attorney again. He nodded once. Then he turned toward the bench. "We maintain our objection," he repeated. "This entire proceeding is one long, orchestrated ambush, Your Honor. We request time to build a response to these allegations, and we reject any document submitted without prior verification." I took one breath, then another, and stepped forward. "Your Honor," I said, voice steady, "I have one document I would like to submit, not as a surprise witness, not as a rebuttal, but as part of the original foundation ownership record." Judge Rhodes lifted her chin. "Is it notarized?" "Yes, ma'am. Signed 2 months before my father passed." A ripple ran through the room again. The board members leaned in. Vivian tensed, like a creature sensing a trap too late. I handed the sealed envelope to the clerk, who passed it carefully to the bench. Judge Rhodes sliced the wax with a letter opener. Her eyes scanned line by line, her mouth unmoving. Then she read aloud, "I, Franklin James Whitaker, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare that the Whitaker Foundation for Girls was conceptualized, built, and financially structured by my daughter, Kaylin Ruth Whitaker. Her sister, Vivian, was placed as the public face of the organization at my request, not by merit or contribution, but due to long-standing donor expectations and social image management. This deception was mine. I insisted on it, and I regret it. Should this record ever surface in a court of law, let it stand as testimony to the true architect of the foundation. The name on the checks may have been Vivian's, but the work, the nights, the design, the field work, the curriculum, it was Kaylin. All of it. Signed, Franklin J. Whitaker. Dated. Notarized. The courtroom didn't gasp this time. It didn't need to. The silence was heavier than any scream could have been. Vivian stood. "She forged it," she spat. "He was sick. He didn't know what he was signing." Judge Rhodes didn't flinch. "Sit down, Ms. Whitaker." Vivian didn't. "Not yet. I built that courtroom. That name. That brand. She was just the ghost in the basement. And now she wants the whole thing? Over some dusty old affidavit." I took a step forward. Only one. Then another. And stopped halfway between her and the bench. "I never wanted the spotlight," I said quietly. "You did. And you had it. But the foundation, the mission, that was mine. You wore it like a costume. I bled for it." Vivian didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Not when the law had already spoken. Not when the lie had already collapsed under its own weight. Judge Rhodes tapped her gavel once. This court finds that all founding rights, operational ownership, and legal representation of the Whitaker Foundation for Girls shall be transferred to Kaylin Ruth Whitaker, effective immediately. She turned to the clerk. Update the state record. Strike Ms. Vivian Whitaker from all incorporation documents. This judgment is final and non-negotiable. Any appeals will be civil only and will not halt execution of transfer. Then she looked directly at Vivian. You may have had the spotlight, Ms. Whitaker, but the light was never yours. I didn't smile, because this wasn't joy. It was gravity, like setting down a weight you forgot you were carrying. The revised charter was handed to me, my name now printed alone at the top of the page. No co-founder, no asterisk, just mine. I folded it carefully, placed it in my leather folio, and turned toward the exit. Vivian didn't stop me. She just sat, back straight, face blank, like someone still waiting for the script to save her. But the scene was over. The morning air held a kind of quiet you can only find before the world wakes up, the kind that clings to the edges of buildings, curls through sidewalk cracks, and asks you, gently, if you're ready to start again. I stepped out of my car, portfolio in hand, the same one that had carried courtroom documents, false diagnoses, sealed affidavits, and now the original deed of the Whitaker Foundation for Girls with only one name on the masthead, mine. The building still looked modest from the outside, stucco walls, slate gray trim, a row of windows that hadn't yet caught the sun. But inside, everything had changed. The audit had triggered full restitution. Every dollar siphoned had been returned. Every fraudulent vendor dissolved. Contracts restructured. Leadership rebuilt. I used none of the settlement for myself, not because I didn't need it, but because I needed something else more. The front lobby still smelled faintly of fresh paint. The walls were soft dove gray, now neutral, grounding. A quiet color, a color that doesn't shout for attention but refuses to disappear. I walked slowly down the hall, fingers grazing the edges of door frames. Each room bore a new plaque. Arts and Expression STEM and Logic Wellness and Boundaries, names chosen by the girls themselves. Because that's what this place was now. Not a monument to a legacy, but a workshop for becoming. I passed by the bulletin board, still empty for now, waiting for the girls to fill it with their drawings, their photos, their small declarations of selfhood. I paused, remembered the board we had when I was 13. Covered in quotes from Vivian, accolades clipped from newspaper articles. I had pinned one of my own essays once about gender equity in classroom funding. It was taken down the next morning. No one ever said why. They didn't have to. Voices echoed from the art room. Laughter. Not loud, but real. I peeked in. A few girls sat around the long table. Red paper, glue sticks, safety scissors scattered like confetti. At the far end, a girl no older than 9 was folding a square of red origami paper. Her fingers were small, clumsy in the most determined way. When she saw me, she smiled, shy but proud. She held it out. A paper crane, one wing slightly bent, the tail a little off-center, but perfect in its own way. I made it for you, she said. I froze. Years ago, I'd made a crane just like this. I'd given it to Vivian after she won her first debate competition, wrapped it in tissue, left it on her desk with a note, for luck, and because you fly higher than you think. She'd crumpled it without reading the note. I don't need weird little birds, she'd said. Maybe you should focus on yourself for once. Now here it was again, red, warm from the girl's hands, offered without expectation. No transaction, no performance, just care, folded into wings. Thank you, I whispered. The girl beamed. I make them when I feel calm, she said, still clutching her glue stick. Maybe you needed one. Maybe I did. I slipped it gently into my coat pocket like it was something precious, like it might lift me. Later that morning, I stood in the back courtyard as the staff began to arrive. Elias, Judge Grant, showed up quietly as he always did. No flowers, no fanfare, just presence. He stood beside me as the sun finally broke the horizon. You did it, he said. I didn't burn it down, I replied. I rebuilt it. He nodded. Then, after a pause, do you want me to stay? I took a breath. The kind that fills more than just your lungs. No, I said gently. I think I need to see who I am without someone rescuing me, even if that someone meant well. He didn't argue. He just placed a hand on my shoulder for a moment, firm, quiet, and then stepped away. In the days that followed, media requests poured in. Local news, morning talk shows, even a documentary pitch. People wanted the scandal, the collapse, the redemption arc. I said no to all of it, because letting Vivian take the spotlight once had nearly cost me everything. Letting her keep the silence, that would have cost me more. But now the silence was mine, to keep or to fill, and I chose neither. I simply let it settle. Some people ask me why I never sued for emotional damages, why I didn't press charges, why I walked away when I could have dragged her name through every headline. The answer was simple. Because truth isn't revenge. It's a weight, a deep, undeniable presence. Once it lands, you don't need to throw it. You just have to make room for it. That night, I returned to the center alone. I walked through the empty halls, lights dimmed, air still. I passed the glass doors to the main lobby, and for a moment I caught my own reflection. Same eyes, same posture, same coat, but I didn't look like someone waiting anymore. I looked like someone who had remembered, not just what was taken, but what could never be erased. I took the crane from my pocket, set it gently on the front desk, and for the first time I whispered, not to the world, not to the courtroom, not to the ghosts of sealed records and paper scars, but to myself, you're allowed to begin again. And I did.